Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Jalen. I'm a part-time family physician and full-time mom to 3. My husband and I live in the inland Northwest. I was supposed to be talking about fall today, but we got almost 7 inches of snow yesterday, so happy winter. It's not even Halloween yet. I was going to take you on a tour of our beautiful fall leaves and show you socks that I'm wearing with my Birkenstocks, but the truth is that now my winter boots are out and it already feels like Narnia. I figured if I don't show up in my sweatshirt and my Ugg slippers, I'm never gonna get on here. So I've got some props today. Hang around, we're gonna talk about seasonal affective disorder. Let's do this. I'm so glad you decided to come back and join me. I don't know what I'm doing on here, but I figured that education is empowerment. So why not talk about this? And we're gonna play with some Legos too. So, honestly, what do you have to lose by sticking around? I was gonna gush about how much I love the fall and apples and pumpkin spice lattes, but I will be truthful that I have eggnog in my fridge and there's snow on the ground, and now fall just feels like it's completely non-applicable to my life. So there you go. That's the truth about the fall. I love winter and fall, and I love the fact that where we live, we have 4 very distinct seasons. But I also just want to take a moment and recognize that fall and winter and these dark gray, long nights and these upcoming seasons can be really hard for some people. A lot of the population struggles with what we've termed the winter blues, and in medicine it's called seasonal affective disorder, and it's a lot more than just the blues. We have this big Bible, if you will, of mental health diseases and disorders, and psychiatrists use it, counselors use it, family practitioners use it. It is our reference manual for everything. It's called the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, or the DSM, and we're on our 5th version currently. I believe it's the 5R version, so the 5th version revised, but you can imagine how long it would take to publish those. Hopefully I'm never invited to an editing board. That would be terrible. Anyway, the point of this is just that we have requirements for seasonal affective disorder, and it essentially is a form of clinical depression that meets every criteria for depression, but it's limited by certain seasons. Most of the time this is fall and winter, but it actually can occur during any season. So those in the southern hemisphere or closer to the equator are less likely to have those distinct 4 seasons like we have here in Washington state. And as a result of that, it can actually happen during any season, which is typically defined by like an environmental season. I've actually had a number of patients that it's been defined by a life event, but it does have to be recurrent, and the symptoms go away entirely the other seasons of the year. So I want us to just recognize that it is a form of clinical depression, and it's not something that we should just be kind of brushing off as like, oh wow, I'm so sorry you hate winter. For many people, it's a lot more than that. And it can look like trouble getting out of bed. It can look like extreme tiredness. It can look like strained relationships as a result of some mood or personality changes. It can look like difficulty at work or difficulty performing a job just because of the change and the shift in seasons. Depression in general can also look like you're just not yourself. And I'm filming a video soon about my postpartum depression, but that totally shifted my perspective on what depression actually is. I no longer consider it something that has to be profound and deep. You can be functional and you can have depression. It's called high functioning depression. And while those people tend to be more rare, it's simply likely because they're less likely to seek treatment, not really recognizing that they actually are depressed. This is exactly the position I found myself in after we had our first baby. And I think that seasonal affective disorder can look a lot like that as well. It can look like extra stress around the holidays. It can look like disrupted or lack of being able to sleep around the holidays. It can look like a lot of things that you wouldn't consciously consider, oh my gosh, I have depression. So as we go through this, let's just keep that in mind. So I brought some props today. I raided my kids' toy bin because I'm a visual learner and I think that this is going to help. So let's make some definitions first. We've got some Lego people, and these are Lego people that we're going to make into little serotonin. Serotonin's a neurotransmitter. It mostly lives in our brain and it functions all over our body. Interestingly though, our brain doesn't produce the bulk majority of serotonin. 70 to 80% of serotonin in a baseline human is actually coming from our gut. So the whole idea of a gut-brain axis certainly is a great theory, and I personally, as a physician, think that there's some validity to it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if you eat an amazingly nutritious diet, it's going to protect you in any way from being diagnosed at some point in time with seasonal affective disorder or clinical depression, or any other mental health disorder for that matter. And for the purpose of illustration, I am going to call these little mobiles, whether it's a car or a raft or a bicycle, we're going to call them SIRT. SIRT is a type of protein carrier that carries neurotransmitters back to their home where they're spit out. So in normal people who have a baseline amount of serotonin, their SIRT, which is a little raft, is regularly carrying that serotonin from places in the body. It gets sucked back up by these little neurons in a synaptic cleft by the nervous system. The real difficulty comes with how this interplays with seasonal affective disorder. We've got serotonin, we've got SIRT, we've got melatonin, and then we've got a whole audience of other participators. Epinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine. All of these things play a part, but none of them are as important or seem to be as important as serotonin. I think it's really important to realize that when we talk about mental health and the mechanisms behind it, lots of times we're kind of opening Pandora's box, but we don't necessarily have all the answers. And a lot of this is individualized based on genetics or personal scenarios, but some of it is just that we truly don't know yet. There are a handful of psychiatric medications that we presume what the mechanism is, but it's not fully clear. In other words, your doctor may give it to you because they're comfortable and they feel comfortable prescribing it based on efficacy and safety trials that are required by the FDA, but they may not necessarily feel entirely confident in saying this is exactly what it's doing in your body as an individual. We understand that people with seasonal affective disorder have more SIRT than people who don't. Now, what does that mean? It means that these little Lego guys who are trying to get out of the end of the neuron and go to work on the body, regulating mood and making you feel good, are less available because those rafts, those little vehicles, are more available. There's more of them to take them back to the synaptic cleft and back to the end of the neuron while they get sucked back up just like a vacuum. Interestingly, during the summer months, sunlight keeps SIRT activity fairly low. So if we kind of thought of this as a giant laser beam, the laser beam pings or freezes some of these vehicles during the summer months. And this is all caused by exposure to UV rays. Healthy UV rays, obviously. The point is that exposure to daylight or exposure to sunlight, which most of us get a ton of during the summer, seems to be a very important part of understanding what's happening when we take that sunlight away. The more serotonin we have in our system, the better we start to feel. Now, I'm just going to pause and say there is something called serotonin syndrome, which is actually very dangerous. It's a rapid increase or rush of serotonin, and it can cause nausea, vomiting, diaphoresis, which is sweating, and it can actually be a medical emergency in some cases. So we don't want too much serotonin, but we also don't want not enough. We want just what's right for us. And most of the time, we're going to figure that out fairly easily because of our mood and how we're feeling. Also interesting is melatonin. So melatonin is something that helps us regulate our sleep, and melatonin is overproduced during the winter months. In other words, we don't have as much sunlight to regulate our circadian rhythm or our daytime and nighttime cycles. And as a result of the lack of daylight stimulation to our bodies and to our eyeballs, all of a sudden our melatonin goes into overproduction, making us feel sleepier than we actually should be. This is one of the reasons why sleep experts will often recommend getting your baby outside in sunlight. This helps actually set their circadian rhythm. And as adults, we should also be doing this. For those of us who work full-time or part-time or in a dark office, we should be making sure that our bodies are exposed to sunlight as much as possible. Now, I have 5 inches of snow outside. I'm not going to go outside in a bikini, and actually, truth be told, I haven't worn a bikini since having kids. But for the most part, we should try to maximize our daylight and sunlight exposure simply because it's able to provide us with extra stimulation of that circadian rhythm and extra decreases in the amount of SIRT, which in turn will increase serotonin. Is all of this making sense? Kind of? A little bit? Okay. So how do we treat seasonal affective disorder? Well, the first one should be obvious. Get outside, get some daylight, get some sunshine. And if you live in a place like here where we have about 6 hours of daytime, is that right? Let me count, probably 8 hours of daytime. That is bright and light and beautiful outside. And if you can't get outside because you're like me and you're working every single hour of daylight, then get a light box. This is a UV light that is safe for your skin. Probably don't want to stare into it, but for the most part, it's safe for your eyes, and it will stimulate or emulate what natural sunlight does. This is it.
Whoa, that was a big land.
This is important because it's important to recognize that UV stimulation has great effects on the body, but you do need to have maximal skin exposure, and you do need to use it for 20 to 30 minutes a day. The second thing that you can do, other than getting outside or getting a little happy box, is to see a counselor. I am a huge fan of therapy. I think that everyone should be in therapy. I was in therapy for years through middle school and high school, and a great therapist is an amazing asset to your life. So therapy is incredible. Even if it's only seasonal, it's a great, great thing to try to work through some of the stressors, maybe handle some of the things that may be coming your way, especially with the holiday season approaching us. And the very third thing to consider is talk to your provider. Medication is something that can be incredibly helpful, and sometimes you just need more Lego guys in your life. I mean, let's be honest here. Medication that we typically use for seasonal affective disorder are called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These are things like Prozac, Lexapro, Celexa, fluoxetine. They're medications that have a very long established safety profile. And even though they're not all exactly the same, I kind of call them like stepsisters or stepbrothers, all part of the same family, but they don't exactly have the same mechanism. Medications can be incredibly helpful. Sometimes there's an adjustment period, but hopefully your provider will talk to you about that. But with these Lego guys, you can kind of see what they're doing. So medications actually provide more serotonin because the ability of the serotonin to get sucked back up is no longer there, or it's at least decreased quite a bit. The fourth thing to consider is the food that you're eating. We know that 70 to 80% of our serotonin in most people is produced inside the gut. And while this may seem like a lot, it's baseline. It's what's supposed to be happening. So if our guts are not working properly, or if we're not feeding them the right foods, oftentimes we can have a decrease in serotonin production simply because of dietary changes. Now, that's not to say that diet is curative of seasonal affective disorder or clinical depression, but I certainly do think it plays a part in how people feel overall. Sometimes this is psychological, sometimes this is more physical, but the bottom line is that we have a lot of foods that are in season during the winter. And interestingly, or maybe not surprisingly, a lot of these foods contain vitamin and mineral profiles that we are lacking in the winter. Do you guys suffer from seasonal affective disorder? I think there have been periods in my life, during residency in particular, where I have for sure felt like it has been very heavy during the winter. And I think adding to the holiday stress and the pressure, if you will, to feel like you have to provide this great holiday or this great experience for your kids or your family can really be stressful for a lot of people. Anyway, I would love to hear, have you suffered from clinical depression or the winter blues, or maybe officially been diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder? If you haven't, and you feel like this kind of hit home with you, I would encourage you to go talk to your doctor. This is not medical advice, it's purely for entertainment purposes, but I do think that talking about it means that the stigma of mental health is less prominent and more people can get help. Have a great day. Bye.